It's late at night. While most people go to sleep after a tiring day, others begin their work as the moon indicates the arrival of darkness over the sky. A transgender black woman is relishing in the bar in Miami, Florida. She smiles at a young black man with curly hair and a thick mustache. The man approaches her, and the two hit it off right away. Little does this woman know that this interaction marks the end of her days in this world. What happens next with the woman is truly gut-wrenching. On their second meetup, the man drives the woman to a secluded place, grabs her neck in an attempt to smother her to death, and then leaves her in the middle of nowhere for the body to decompose.
You pick the ones that you think you're going to kill
No,
first?
no. If you want, depends on how the neck looks. Got a smooth neck and turn. As a child, I got attracted to
The neck part.
Yeah.
So you pick them out by the way that their neck looks, because if the neck looks good, then it might be somebody that you want to have sex with or somebody that you might want to kill. What's the thought?
Both.
Both. Okay.
The most heinous serial killer, Samuel McDowell, also known as Samuel Little, showed no remorse as he proudly described how he murdered his first victim in 1971. And then there was no stopping him from hunting down helpless women who fall under the category of the less dead people. From 1971 to 2005, this man would pursue, kill vulnerable women from one state to another, and get away with at least a haunting number of 93 murders over a period of several decades.
I met her in a nightclub in New Orleans. So I took off the exit, went, and that sure enough was a road leading into the woods. And we went in and parked. I grabbed her by the legs and pulled her to the water. That's the only one that I ever killed by drowning.
A pure evil who does not show a hint of remorse through his expressions, Samuel Little was rather proud of his murder confessions. On June 7, 1940, a prostitute gave birth to a child who would ruthlessly kill women from her profession. The most prolific murderer in the history of the USA was born in the small town of Reynolds, Georgia. This town had a population of about 1,000. Most of the town residents lived below the poverty line. Samuel was an unwanted child since the day he arrived in this world. At one point, his mother abandoned him on the side of the road so she could get away with the expenses of raising a child. He saw his mother selling herself at night and called her the Lady of the Night in one of his confessions. Since his early childhood days, Samuel saw how the poorest of people worked to earn money. He had quite a distant relationship with his mother, who would think of him as an additional expense and not a son. But Samuel was not completely abandoned by his family. His grandmother decided to take responsibility for his expenditures and gave him a place in her house in Lorain, Ohio. Samuel attended Hawthorne Junior High School, but quickly dropped out due to poor grades and even poorer behavior. He was, however, good at art and boxing, which came in handy later in life when he viciously took the lives of innocent women. After dropping out of school, he would choose a path that would drive him to commit crimes. Samuel would get addicted to breaking the law, which would land him in prison over 100 times. In 1956, at the young age of 16, Samuel was convicted of breaking and entering. He was sent to a juvenile detention center and released shortly. About 5 years later, he was once again caught breaking and entering a Lorain furniture store. This time he was sent to an adult prison for some time. Samuel's list of crimes increased as he got older. He was arrested about 26 times in 11 different states by the time he reached 35 years of age. This man had quite a clear vision of what he wanted in life, and it clearly did not involve abiding by the law. Samuel had a long list of crimes that did not involve murder yet: assault, theft, DUIs, fraud, solicitation, armed robbery, breaking and entering, aggravated assault on a police officer, shoplifting, and many more crimes that Samuel would commit throughout his life before finally getting sentenced to life in prison. While he is getting caught, convicted, and released, nobody in law enforcement has realized that this man is killing women from one U.S. state to another. By 1975, he had been across 11 states for almost every crime that you have heard of, and even attacking government officials. And yet, he always managed to walk free. Then came 1982. Little was arrested in Pascagoula, Mississippi, for the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose Lepre, who had gone missing that September. It seemed like the law had finally caught up with him, but no. A grand jury refused to indict him, and just like that, he was off the hook. Before investigators could do anything else, Little was shipped off to Florida, where he was tried for the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount. Witnesses said they had seen him with Mount the night before she disappeared, but the jury didn't trust their testimonies. Once again, he walked free in January 1984. After that, Little moved to California and wasted no time finding new victims. In October 1984, he kidnapped, beat, and strangled 22-year-old Lori Barros in San Diego. She survived. A month later, police found him in the back seat of his car with another woman, beaten, unconscious, and barely alive. She had been left in the same area where he had attacked Barros. This time, he was sentenced to just 2.5 years in prison, and the moment he got out in February 1987, he went straight to Los Angeles and murdered at least 10 more women. For years, Little moved from place to place, leaving behind a trail of victims while staying just out of reach of the law. All that changed on September 5, 2012. Police found him at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky, and arrested him on a narcotics charge. It seemed like a small offense, but little did they know, a DNA test will change everything moving forward. The results linked him to 3 cold cases from the 1980s: Linda Alford, killed in July 1987, Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, killed in September of the same year, and Audrey Nelson Everett, killed in August 2 years later. All 3 had been strangled and dumped on the streets of Los Angeles. That arrest opened the floodgates, and the water came drowning the law enforcement authorities. Investigators soon tied him to more than 30 other murders from the same time period. The case of Melinda Lepre in Mississippi was reopened, and the deeper police dug, the worse it got. Eventually, Little admitted to killing 93 women across multiple states, making him the deadliest serial killer in U.S. history. For years, he had gone unnoticed, preying on women society had overlooked. But in the end, his past caught up with him, and this time, there was no escaping justice. By September 2014, nearly 2 years later after he was caught on a narcotics charge, Samuel Little was finally on trial for the murders of Linda Alford, Audrey Nelson Everett, and Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca. The prosecution had rock-solid DNA evidence, plus testimony from survivors who had barely escaped his attacks over the years. On September 25, 2014, the verdict came down: Samuel Little was found guilty. Little was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. But even then, he refused to admit what he had done, insisting he was innocent. He was locked up at California State Prison in Los Angeles County. But that was far from the end of his story. For decades, law enforcement suspected that Little had killed far more people than they could prove. Then, in November of 2018, everything changed. Out of nowhere, he confessed to strangling Melissa Thomas in 1996. A few days later, he admitted to killing Denise Christie brothers in 1994. That confession led to another trial in Texas, where he pleaded guilty and picked up another life sentence. But he wasn't done talking. Over the next few weeks, Little started spilling details about dozens of other murders. Investigators were stunned as he confessed to more than 90 killings across 14 states, spanning from 1970 to 2005. He looked in the eyes of the officers as he admitted to these crimes, making fun of the authorities who failed to catch him as he put the vulnerable through extreme suffering before finally taking their lives. His memory was terrifyingly sharp. He could describe victims in detail, recall where he had picked them up, and even explain how he had disposed of their bodies. He admitted to killing of Brenda Alexander in Alabama, Fredonia Smith in Georgia, Dorothy Richards and Daisy McGuire in Louisiana, Julia Critchfield in Mississippi. He had claimed to dump her body off a cliff. Nancy Carol Stevens in Mississippi, Evelyn Weston in South Carolina, Rosie Hill in Florida. And those were just the ones confirmed in November of 2018. Little wasn't just talking, he was drawing. From his prison cell, he sketched portraits of his victims, capturing their faces with haunting accuracy. The FBI released these drawings, hoping to match them to real missing persons and unsolved cases. And it worked. At least one of his sketches helped solve a cold case in Ohio. The confessions kept coming, and they would not stop until the death of this monster. In December 2018, he was indicted for the 1981 murder of Linda Sue Boards in Kentucky. That same month, a Tennessee victim from 1975 was finally identified as Martha Cunningham. Then, in 2019, he was linked to even more killings in Ohio, including Mary Jo Payton and Rose Evans in Cleveland. A woman found in near I-271 in Ohio, he couldn't remember her name. A victim in Akron. 2 women in Cincinnati. One was Anna Stewart, last seen visiting her sister in the hospital in 1981. A woman he met in Columbus and dumped in Kentucky. By June 2019, he had been officially indicted for multiple Ohio murders. Little's confessions didn't just close cold cases, they also freed innocent people. In November 2020, he admitted to 2 Florida murders, including one where someone else had been wrongfully convicted. Even after his death in December 2020, his crimes were still being uncovered. In 2022, authorities identified Zena Marie Jones, one of his Memphis victims from the 90s. In the end, Samuel Little confessed to so many murders that were more than any other known serial killer in American history. Many of his victims were women society had ignored: sex workers, runaways, women struggling with addiction. They had been forgotten, their cases left unsolved for decades. But in his final years, Little gave them back their names. He told their stories. And though justice came far too late for most of them, their families finally got the answers they had been waiting for. Here are some of the stories, in his own filthy words, that Little told about the victims he claimed were less dead. Location 1, Miami, Florida. Victim 1, Marianne. Marianne was a young and attractive teenage transgender black woman. According to Samuel Little, she was around 140 pounds and between 5 feet 6 to 5 feet 7 inches tall. In 1971, the two met at a bar called Pool Palace in Miami, Florida. They talked for a while and hit it off immediately. A few days later, they crossed paths again at another bar in Overtown. This time, Little offered Marianne a ride home, and she accepted without hesitation. Upon arriving at her residence, one of Marianne's roommates asked Little to buy shaving cream. Taking advantage of the moment, he lured Marianne back into his car under the pretense of running the errand. Once on Highway 27, he reached over and wrapped his hands around her throat, tightening his grip until she was lifeless.
And drug her into the groups back there and pulled her deeper into a path. A little path was running somewhere. I don't know where it led it to, but it was running deeper into the undergrowth. It's like Everglades like that. And we ran into some water running. But before we got to the water, the earth was mushy. I turned her loose, and she fell into it face down.
And how far outside of Miami do you think you were?
About a mile, 2 miles.
What year did Marianne occur?
72.
Okay, 1972.
She was.
Without remorse, he drove to a remote dirt road leading to a river, where he discarded her body into the thick, muddy waters. Then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to his life, unbothered and unnoticed. Victim 2, Unknown Woman. Little's second victim in Florida, murdered in 71 or 72, was another black woman. He described her with brutal disdain, calling her ugly, dark-skinned, short, and stiff. He believed she worked as a prostitute. After picking her up, he drove to the woods near military property, where he smothered her to death before abandoning her body among the trees, assuming someone would eventually discover it. Victim 3. Emily. In the mid-70s, Little took the life of a young black prostitute, whom he recalls as Emily. He remembered her as having big legs and a pretty face. She carried a University of Miami student ID, reinforcing his belief that she worked as a prostitute. After luring Emily into his car, he drove down a highway toward a secluded dirt road. A fight broke out between them, and Emily fought back, throwing punches at him. Enraged, Little overpowered her, beating her to death before dragging her lifeless body to a garbage pile and concealing it beneath a mattress. He even recalled seeing a man watching from a distance, but, as always, he walked away without consequence. Victim 4. Unknown woman. A 28-year-old black woman, dark-skinned and well-built, crossed paths with Little 2 years after he had known her family. He and his girlfriend, Jean, had sold clothes to them on Nelson Street. When he ran into her at a liquor store, she was complaining about her husband's mistreatment. Seizing the opportunity, Little offered her comfort and a ride. And then, he strangled her and abandoned her body in the thick grass, leaving her to be swallowed by the elements. Victim 5. Unknown woman. In 1977 or 1978, Little met a chubby black woman dancing at a bar. She was wearing shorts that night, but later changed into a skirt at her house before they left together. Her siblings, familiar with Little, called him Sam. After she rejoined him outside, he told her they were going to Lakeland. Instead, he drove toward the dark woods near the railroad tracks, where he strangled her to death. He kept her underwear as a twisted trophy before discarding her body in the open wilderness. Location 2. North Little Rock, Arkansas. Victim 1. Ruth. On a frigid, snowy day in North Little Rock, Arkansas, Little encountered another black woman, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, whom he believes was named Ruth. They spent 3 days together before he was arrested for shoplifting. Upon his release 3 hours later, he returned to his car where Ruth was asleep in the passenger seat. They drove around, meeting her ex-boyfriend before eventually heading back to her place. The following day, Little drove Ruth down a dirt road, determined to make her his next victim. He strangled her manually, then abandoned her lifeless body near a cornfield. Location 3. California. Victim 1. Unknown woman. In 1987, in Los Angeles, Little entered a drug dealer's house and spotted a black woman wearing shorts. The dealer, also her pimp, ordered her to leave with Little. After purchasing drugs, they entered an abandoned house with a garage cluttered with wood planks, paint cans, and sawhorses. They climbed onto a ledge inside the garage, but as Little's sick urges consumed him, he wrapped his hands around her throat. The young woman fought desperately, and in their struggle, they fell off the ledge. But Little's grip remained firm. He choked her to death. Weeks later, when he drove by, the crime scene was taped off, and soon after, the entire structure was demolished. Victim 2. Unknown woman. Later, still in California, Little met another black woman wearing a mini dress at a motel near Tam's Burgers in Los Angeles. He contemptuously called her a crackhead. Exploiting her drug addiction, he lured her into his car. He parked near thick vegetation by a laundromat, where she climbed into the back seat. He followed, wrapped his hands around her throat, and squeezed until she stopped breathing. He later disposed of her body near an iron pipe railing, hanging her lifeless corpse among the thick trees and underbrush, confident that no one would find her. Victim 3. Unknown teenage girl. A teenage girl, about 19 years old, became another victim of his monstrosity. She was petite, weighing only 120 pounds, and had a distinctive red bandana around her forehead with tattoos adorning her body. Little met her in Compton, California, and promised her drugs. She trusted him and got into his car. He drove her to the secluded Hollywood Hills, where he suddenly turned violent. The young girl fought for her life with every ounce of her strength, but it was no match for Little's trained fists. When he finally crushed the life out of her, he pulled over by a fence and threw her body down the steep hillside, listening with satisfaction as it tumbled into the darkness. Victim 4. Unknown woman. Another victim met her tragic fate at Little's hands in 1992. She was a black woman wearing a religious turban, light-skinned, and weighed about 200 pounds. Little lured her into his car and drove to his residence before heading to Compton. It was raining when he parked behind a store during a riot. The chaos outside masked her final struggle. She honked, desperately trying to summon help. A Hispanic man noticed, but did nothing. Overpowering her, Little smothered her to death. He placed her lifeless body in the passenger seat to make it look as though she were merely sleeping. Then, he drove to a nearby bank branch and pulled her body onto the manicured lawn, leaving her to the mercy of the storm. But despite his staggering body count, he was only officially convicted for 8 murders, cases where DNA and witness testimonies made his guilt undeniable. These victims were just the beginning of Little retelling the tales of his monstrosity. Some names he remembered, while some he had long forgotten. However, he still recalled the eerie details of his victims' weight and height, even remembering their facial features. The list would go on to complete the horrific number of 93. While he admitted to the murders, Samuel Little also began to share the details of his personal life during the years he killed innocent women left and right. Little had a longtime girlfriend, Aurelia Dorsey, who stuck by his side, even helping him evade conviction in a 1972 robbery case. Their relationship wasn't built on love in any conventional sense. It thrived in the shadows of crime, a partnership rooted in deception and survival. But Dorsey, like so many in Little's circle, didn't get a happy ending. She died of a brain hemorrhage in 1988, leaving him to continue his dark work alone. Even in death, Little remained an enigma. On December 30th, 2020, he passed away in a Los Angeles County hospital. Officially, there was no cause of death listed, but given his failing health, diabetes, heart problems, and a body worn down by time, his end was inevitable. Unlike his victims who were discarded like afterthoughts, he slipped away peacefully, a privilege he never granted them. But death didn't grant him an escape from being the infamous monster that he was. His crimes and confessions became the subject of books, interviews, and documentaries. Author Gillian Loren sat across from him for more than 40 hours, listening as he relived his horrors, sketching the faces of women whose names had long been forgotten. She had started with the intention of writing a crime novel, but her path took a sharp turn when she learned about him from LAPD detective Mitzi Roberts. What began as fiction turned into a brutal, undeniable reality. Lauren's work led to the haunting Stars docuseries Confronting a Serial Killer and her book Behold the Monster, both peeling back the layers of Little's twisted existence. Through her efforts, the world saw not just the killer, but the failures of a system that let him keep killing for over 40 years. His victims weren't just statistics, they were people, ignored because of their race, lifestyle, or circumstances. Society had forgotten them, but Little hadn't. He remembered every detail. In the end, Samuel Little died as he lived, in his own world, his own twisted mind, painting the faces of the women he murdered. He never showed remorse, never feared justice. He saw himself as untouchable, a predator who played by his own rules. But history will remember him differently, not as a mastermind or a legend, but as a killer with no remorse who thrived on society's indifference. And while his body rests in a grave somewhere, his victims still speak, through their families, through investigators, and through the stories now told to ensure that monsters like him don't go unnoticed again. His story is a harrowing reminder of the victims society often overlooks, the ones whose disappearances go unnoticed, whose names fade without justice. The question remains, how many more remain nameless, were lost in the silence of his brutal legacy?